Rochelle.
Hi there, it's me, Kara.
And I'm Billy.
Hey, I'm Sam, and we're all part of the family ministry team. We are gearing up for a great fall season, and we're so grateful to partner with you as your students grow in their walk with Jesus.
We know school life is filled with twists and turns, and living out our faith is sometimes hard. We want to walk beside your students to help them navigate the ups and downs and encourage them along the way.
We'd like to let you know that we'll be starting our exciting fall midweek programming for kids entering 1st through 12th grade on Wednesday, September 13th at 6:30 p.m. on our Greenford campus.
In middle school ministry, our midweek program is all about building relationships. We have groups that will eat together, play games, pray for each other, and learn to follow Jesus one step at a time.
Parents with high school students, we look forward to seeing your student at HSM Everyone. Come to grow in your faith and have fun. We will have fun in fellowship nights, lesson nights, worship and prayer nights, and much more. And don't miss out on HSM anywhere.
We hope your students will join us as we strive to grow in a relationship with one another and with Jesus.
Good morning. How are we doing? It's good to be back. I was off with a couple of weeks with my family on vacation. Enjoyed every minute of it. It is good to be back home, though, and back in the saddle and doing this thing. I heard Sheldon did an all right job. Is that fair? Yeah? Okay. I'm only kidding. He's actually in the audience, so I needed to get a jab because I heard he threw a couple my way, so that's only fair and love and more, right? He does have cooler pants than I have, but I'm good with it. I do have a bet with him that I want to do. I have decided, since he likes to wear red pants and blue sport coats, that I will wear a suit if he will wear a pair of shorts and a cowboy belt. Does that sound like a fair bet? So anyway, no, he did a fantastic job. It was great to be able to be away. I know he's an incredible communicator and an awesome part of our team, so I was glad that he was able to do that. This morning, before we jump in, though, I do want to talk just a brief minute what you just saw on the video, but also what you saw in the baptistry. We believe wholeheartedly in the next generation as they're growing up and becoming followers of Jesus, and we spend a lot of time and resources and energy to build strong kids programs. And there's a thing in our world, we call it the 414 window, that 86% of believers in Jesus will make the decision to follow Christ, typically between the ages of 4 and 14, as you just saw just a little bit ago. And so it's highly important to us, and part of that is you having your kids involved in our program. Sunday morning, we've got programs for your children. Also midweek, we got some great midweek programs to connect and get your kids connected here and being involved. So I highly want to encourage that. Also with that, this year, we're trying to beef up some of our courses and some of the things that we're doing for adults. So on Wednesday nights, we've got several offerings here. One is a Financial Peace University class. If you've ever wanted to learn good budgeting, how to manage your money well, that is an incredible course. I would highly recommend it. My wife and I have been through it, and it literally changed our life and the way we view and handle God's money. We also have Smart Step Family. If you're dealing with some step family issues, blended family issues, those things can be difficult to navigate, and we've got a great program that will be going on as well. Also, Sheldon and I, and Bruce Jeffries, one of our elders, is doing a course called The Story-Formed Way, which is basically the story of the Bible from beginning to end. It's kind of a big picture view. It runs about 12 weeks. Would love for you to be in that. Not only will you get to be a part of it, but we will actually show you how to use it to be able to use with other people who maybe want to learn about the overview of the Bible and learn a little bit more about their faith. And then we also have a course called Faith Tactics. And Faith Tactics is an apologetics course. Apologetics is a fancy term for the defense of our faith, meaning that you can carry on educated dialogue with people who do not believe the same things that you do, but we're going to teach you in a way that you can do it with grace and kindness, but yet still hold firm to your faith. And really looking forward to those. If you go to our website, you can check out the kids programming as well as those adult courses as well. We'd really like you to be a part of it. There is a sign-up required for you to be in the adult course, so we know kind of what we've got going on, so we know where to put everybody. So again, want to encourage you with those things. Super excited about the fall and all that is coming our way. Now this morning, We're continuing our series, The Good News of Summer. We've been going through a book called Philippians. For those of you who might not have been here the last couple of weeks, Philippians is a letter that Paul wrote to the church at Philippi. Now, Philippi is a city that Paul planted one of his first churches. And what's interesting is this letter is filled with all kinds of good news. And all of us like good news, right? As a matter of fact, the letter that Paul writes is the most joy-filled letter in all of the Bible. And it's also one of the shortest, so it's an easy read. It's just a couple chapters long. But what's interesting today as we dive into chapter 4, Paul's going to start with some bad news, but he's very quickly going to move to good news. Now, the bad news is, and I think you guys know this, but we're going to talk about it because Paul talks about how to handle these things when they come in our life. The bad news is this: life throws curveballs, right? Life throws curveballs. Anybody get an amen on that one, right? You agree? Right, it happens, right? And it does not matter. It doesn't matter how good looking you are. It doesn't matter how many followers you have on social media. It doesn't matter the career path that you are on. It doesn't matter how much money you have or you don't have. Life throws curveballs to all of us. And here's the thing. How are we going to deal with those things when they happen? And that's the good news, is Paul's actually going to show us how to handle those things and what that's like, okay? And he's going to give us some answers. Now, again, quick follow-up. Paul is in prison right now. He's facing a trial, and he is figuring that he is going to lose his life, that he's going to be executed by the Roman government. So he realizes that he is on borrowed time. And in this situation, this church that he had planted years earlier was sending some encouragement to Paul. They sent some gifts. They sent some letters, wanted to encourage him to keep his spirits up. And Paul has some things that maybe we would love to have in this moment. He's got time, lots of it. He's chained to a Roman guard, doesn't have a lot to do. He's sitting in a dungeon. So he starts penning a letter back to this church, back to this group of believers to encourage them. Isn't that crazy? He's in the worst possible scenario that you could imagine being in, yet Paul's writing this letter of encouragement because he doesn't want them to get discouraged. He doesn't want them to lose sight, and he wants them to stay focused on the thing that matters most, and that's their relationship with Jesus. Okay, and he's wanting to remind them that joy, and this is a big part of chapter 4, that joy is not found in your circumstances. I'm going to say that again. Joy is not found in your circumstances, because it's not. Because life does some crazy things. It's only found in a true, meaningful relationship with Jesus Christ, a life-giving relationship. And that's what we're going to kind of dive into, and Paul's going to build a case for. Now, let's just be honest for a second. Joy is not the norm in our culture. Can we agree on that? Right? That is kind of the exception to the rule. The normal rule, it seems to be that people are disgruntled, that people are not happy. And I can kind of see why. You wake up in the morning, you're feeling good, you get on your news media, you have some unfortunate circumstances in life, some certain people maybe get on your nerves a little bit, and all of a sudden a great day turns into a really bad day really fast. Anybody understand or been there with me, right? You know what's happening. Well, here's the thing. Oftentimes, what we choose instead of joy is we choose these three things: worry, fear, or complaining. Let's have another question. How many of you have experienced one of those three things in the last 48 hours by show of hands? Right? Isn't it crazy? As a matter of fact, I'm picking on them today. They didn't realize this, but our praise team was talking. We have a prayer time right before the service begins for our 8 o'clock service, and one of the gentlemen said, "Hey, I've got a friend. He's in serious condition. Something about a dog licking a wound on his body. He ended up getting this bacterial infection." So everybody starts freaking out about dogs. I'm a dog lover, okay? So I'm kind of laughing. I also know the message content. What was the immediate thing? Worry. All of a sudden, they're like, "Oh my gosh, I can't let my dog lick me." And I'm like, whoa, like let's slow the train down a little bit, folks, right? But that's what happens. Our natural tendency when we hear something or we catch wind of some weird, awkward thing, that we either worry or we fear, or we kind of latch on to complaining that the world is falling apart. And joy seems to be one of those things, though, that doesn't happen naturally. It's actually something that we almost need to be trained in, okay? And Paul's going to kind of make a case for this, because the large majority of our culture does not intentionally choose joy. We intentionally lean into the wrong things. And I would argue and I would make this argument probably any day with anybody, that one of the key factors and evidences of the Spirit of God working in your life is that you are a person filled with joy, that you experience joy, and more importantly, you demonstrate it in all aspects of your life. When I would think of a mature believer, I think of somebody who has more joy in life than they don't have joy, okay? And Paul is going to make that argument in Philippians 4. Again, a reminder, Paul is in the worst possible scenario you could think of. He's not on the island of Fiji drinking little drinks with umbrellas in them, all right? He's chained to a Roman guard. He knows he may lose his life. But Paul knows that if we can demonstrate joy, regardless of circumstances, it can change the way that we live our life. In fact, the only thing, I would make the argument, the only thing that can rob you of your joy, are you ready for this? Is not your boss. I know that's hard to believe. It's not your circumstances. It's not your ex. It's not your friends. And it's not your kids. Even though those little life suckers, right? They can do it sometimes. That's not it. You know the only thing that can rob you of your joy? You. And you get to make a choice today. And we're going to talk about that and why that is so important to your faith journey, because we get to make a choice. Now, again, don't misunderstand me. I'm not talking about Pollyanna, your life, your glass is half full all the time and you're fake with it. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about finding joy in all circumstances of life, because I believe this. I believe when you grieve, you can have joy. I believe when you're going through tough circumstances, you can have joy. I believe when you're upset that you can find joy. We're going to talk about that here in a second. It's possible, and Paul shows us how. Now, he starts in verse 1 of Philippians 4. If you've got your Bible, electronic device, go to Philippians chapter 4. I'm using the NLT version, the New Living Translation. It's just a little easier to read, but if you don't have one, follow along with me. He starts here, "Therefore, my dear brothers and sisters." Now, the word therefore is kind of an interesting word, because what he's saying is, it's an application word is what it is. He's just given a whole bunch of information. Sheldon talked about that last week in Philippians 3. And now he's saying, okay, because of these things, therefore, now we're going to put some action steps to it, okay? So here's some application to this. So he just got describing something that was super duper important. And he's saying, okay, because of these things, therefore, and then he says, my dear brothers and sisters. And he's illustrating, these are terms of endearment. These are deep friends, deep relationships with people that he has at this church. So he's built these relationships, and he wants them to know that they're super important to him, all right? And it's obvious that Paul loves these people. Why? He's led a lot of them to Jesus. He's been in discipling relationships with them. He's done life at a very deep level with them. They've encouraged him. He wants to keep encouraging them so they don't lose heart in this crazy thing. So he says, therefore, my dear brothers and sisters, stay true to the Lord. I love you and long to see you, dear friends, for you are my what? My joy. You are my joy and the crown I receive for my work. So he's saying, look, you bring the joy to my life. Now, it's interesting because he's talking about joy, and then he uses this word crown. Now, what's that about, you might be asking? Well, he's talking about eternity here. He's talking about the fact that his joy in his life is to bring people to Jesus. And he realizes that if Jesus can impact your life, that you can have a life-altering relationship with him, and that because of some of the work that he has done, that he's made that his mission, his reward is not here on this earth. His reward is going to be in heaven. And he's saying, look, I want you to understand, prison is difficult. I want you to understand the circumstances I'm under is not easy. You're going to be facing some stuff. But hear me, it's all worth it because of Jesus. And you're going to find joy in that. And ultimately, if you live the life that God has called you to live and you do what it is that God has called you to do, you're going to receive a crown that far outweighs anything amazing on this earth. Now, before we jump into verses 2 and 3, he wants to encourage them now to stay unified. And I think this is super important. Because what was happening, and we're going to see here in just a minute, is there began to be some division in the church. And I think this is one of the biggest issues facing the church in 2023 is division. And if we're not careful, Satan's going to start using some things, political divisions, cultural divisions, and all these crazy things, and he's going to try to splinter the church because he realizes that if he can splinter the church, then it becomes ineffective in culture. And Paul's realizing this as well with the church at Philippi, so he's encouraging them to stay united. And he's realizing that, and he's found out that there's a disagreement that's happening between two of the predominant leaders in this church at Philippi. My guess is because he received some encouragement from them, they wrote him a letter, somebody wrote a letter and kind of explained, hey, there's some things going on, and Paul mentions them by name. He says, now, I appeal to Euodia and Syntyche, please, because you belong to the Lord, settle your disagreement, okay? He's saying, look, whatever it is that's going on, I don't know all the details. I'm here in prison, but there's something bigger that you need to be living for in life. And I ask you, my true partner, to help these two women, for they worked hard with me in telling others the good news. So we know they're devout followers of Jesus. And Paul's saying, look, don't let this division wreck you. There's something so much more important. They worked along with Clement and the rest of the co-workers whose names are now written in the Lamb's book of life. It's interesting, he mentions Clement here as well. So he mentions these two ladies by name, and he mentions Clement. What's interesting about Clement is he's never mentioned again in all of the Bible. So we really don't know who this dude is. But Paul, realizing that he probably has some relational equity with these two ladies, and he's saying, look, this thing needs to be dealt with. Now, there's obviously something going on there, and Paul felt as though he needed to say something. Now, what's interesting is he doesn't address the actual issue. My guess is he knows what the issue is because he's acknowledging this, but he doesn't address the issue. And if you look at Paul's letters, most of the New Testament Paul wrote, they're letters to different either people or churches, and if they were a doctrinal issue, Paul would address it directly. For instance, you get into the book of 1st and 2nd Corinthians. It's a letter written to the church at Corinth, and Paul dealt with a lot of doctrinal issues in that book. Well, here, I don't think Paul is saying, okay, it's not necessarily a doctrinal issue, but it is a big enough relational issue that if you don't settle this thing, it's going to end up splintering and doing damage. And he's saying, look, you need to deal with this because you're going to end up having the joy of your life robbed, and you're going to end up severing a relationship, and there's no reason for that. So, some of you may be thinking, well, what in the world does that have to do with me? Well, I'm going to tell you. I'm going to ask you a simple question that does not have a simple answer. Don't you love that? It's a simple question, but it doesn't have a simple answer. So here's the question. Does anybody have any relationships right now that need reconciled? Tough question, isn't it? To answer, anyway. Let me ask it a different way. If someone mentions the name of someone, and you hear that name, does something well up in you? You've tried to put it in the back of your mind, you've tried to move on, but the truth is you've really not reconciled the relationship. Are you at odds with someone? Has someone offended you, hurt you, caused you pain? Maybe you don't even know it until somebody mentions their name. Or maybe you wake up and you do know it and you think about it often. See, maybe that person who offended you is no longer in your life. Maybe that person who offended you might not even be alive right now. But I want you to hear me because it has nothing to do with the other person right now. This has to do with you. And this is what Paul is getting at. See, this isn't about their response. This isn't about them feeling sorry. It's not them apologizing or saying that they did something wrong. It's actually not about even who's right and who's wrong. This is about recognizing that the longer you hold on to an offense, the longer that you hold it, the more bitter you become. I'm going to say that again. The longer you hold on to an offense, the more bitter you become. And it's one of Satan's greatest tools. And the longer you're bitter, the more bitterness grows in you, then bitterness turns into contempt. And contempt of a relationship only hardens the heart. And you know who gets hurt? You do. You do. I love the quote by Elena Stewart. She says, bitterness and resentment only hurt one person, and it is not the person that we're resenting. It's us. And see, Paul's addressing this, and he's saying this is super important to your faith journey. So here's a very simple question and an application. Is there anybody you need to reconcile with today? I didn't ask if there's somebody you want to reconcile with today. Is there somebody in your life that you need to reconcile with? Again, I don't know the details, and I don't know who needs to hear this, but you're holding on to things. If you're honest with yourself deep in your heart, that you're holding on to things that Satan is going to use to do damage in your life. And Paul realized it, and I realize it, and all you have to do is read this chapter and you'll realize it. And you got to be honest with yourself because you got to begin to work through this process. Matter of fact, Jesus said in Mark chapter 11, verse 25, but when you are praying, first, you ready for this? Forgive anyone you are holding grudges against, so that your Father in heaven will forgive your sins too. Let me ask you a question, just an honest question. How many of you have gone to God the Father because you know you've sinned and you know you've done something wrong and you want his forgiveness, but you know deep in your core that you have not extended that same grace and forgiveness to someone else because you feel they don't deserve it? This is why Jesus said these words. He says, but when you're praying, first forgive anyone you are holding a grudge against, so that your Father in heaven will forgive you as well. Hear me, I'm not saying you got to be besties. I'm not saying that you got to have them over for dinner every night. I'm not even saying that at all. What I am saying is the damage that it'll do to your heart and to your soul. And as we look at verses 4 through 9, Paul's going to show us 3 essential elements of our faith. And then he's going to show us a promise that we need to hold on to. All right? I want to start in verse 4 as you ponder that question. Always be full of joy in the Lord. I say again, what's that word? Rejoice. It's interesting because he says it twice. Always be full of joy. Again, I say rejoice. Now, rejoice isn't a word that we use a lot of times in our culture. It's a church word. Sometimes they're in songs and different things, but that's not a word that gets used a lot. But rejoice its true meaning is joy on repeat. It's finding the joy in everything that you do in life. And that's the advice that Paul's giving. He's saying, look, find joy. Make that part of your life. Because simply put, life throws curveballs. And things are going to happen, and situations are going to happen in your life that you're not ready for, and you need to have joy on repeat. It's a fact that bad, crazy things are going to happen. It's just the reality. And Paul is telling the Philippians, and he's telling us the one thing that never changes in life. There's a lot that does, but the one thing that never changes, the one constant, is Jesus Christ. Matter of fact, the writer of Hebrews says these words in Hebrews chapter 13, verse 8. Jesus Christ is the same yesterday, today, and forever. It's the only constant in our life whatsoever. And Paul acknowledges this, all right, that our situation and our circumstances can be awesome at times and praiseworthy, and sometimes they can be downright crazy. But he's giving some essential elements to our faith, and he's wanting us to understand that these are important. And the first one is this: because God is always faithful, okay? He never changes. We can always rejoice. We always have the opportunity to rejoice. Now, Paul says always, and maybe you're reading and you're thinking to yourself, okay, why does he say that twice? Well, it's important because Paul knows that there's a cynic in all of us, right? There's 2 of you in the room. Everybody else is like, no, I'm not a cynic. We are, right? Let me ask it a fun way. Have you ever woke up in the morning and just wanted to be in a bad mood? You ever? Like, you just kind of want to have a poopy party. You do. And you want everybody to have a poopy party with you. And when people try to get you out of it, what happens? You get mad at them. Isn't that interesting? Right? We kind of have this wallowing thing. And hear me, it's super easy to rejoice when things are really, 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 really good. When you're sitting on the beach, when the sun's shining, when you don't have a worry in the world, it's awesome. It's much harder when there are clouds, when it rains and it snows, and guess what's coming to Northeast Ohio? Yeehaw! You're glad you came today, right? Somebody likes snow. You're one of only one. See, when things are going great, it's easy. For instance, I was on vacation the past 10 days. It was great. I didn't answer emails. I didn't answer phone calls. It was fabulous, right? And then reality hits. You got to come home. And you got all this stuff, right? And in those moments when everything's just perfect and you're getting to enjoy all of the perfect things in life, whatever those are for you, it may be a perfect day, it may be a vacation, maybe everything's working great at work. Those days are awesome. But what happens when life throws the curveball? See, let's be real. It's hard to show joy when you're fighting cancer. It's hard to show joy when you've had a miscarriage. It's hard to show joy when you're dealing with divorce or a loss of a job. See, a lot of those things you can't control. Some of them you can, but a lot of them you can't. And it's hard to find joy when life throws curveballs. And maybe, just maybe, you're not going to react so perfectly at the beginning. But the truth is, Paul's saying there is something that we can learn in this. We can actually train ourselves to be joyful in the good and in the bad. We have to grow in this area, and it's an essential element to all of our faith. Carl Sandburg said it this way. I just think it's a great example of the Christian faith. He says, there's an eagle in me that wants to soar, and there's a hippopotamus in me that wants to wallow. Isn't that true? Like there are days you're like, yeah, I'm on cloud 9, and there are other days you're like, leave me alone, my life is awful. And he's describing the life. I believe this is the dual nature that our life deals with. As a matter of fact, Paul talks about this in Romans chapter 7. If you remember the study that we just had here a couple of months back, he says, I love God's law with all of my heart, but there's another power within me that is at war with my mind. And this power makes me a slave to the sin that is still within me. Paul actually goes on to say in Romans, he says, there's some things that I know I should do, but I just don't want to do them. I'd rather do the things that aren't right. And see, every day you have a choice. Will you live according to the new nature, the relationship that you have with Jesus, or will you choose to slide back to the old nature and kind of wallow? Because that's what Satan is begging us to do. He's trying to convince us that that's the life that we get to choose. And honestly, we have a better choice. As Paul said earlier, God is the constant in all of this. He never changes. He is always faithful. Which leads to the second element that I want to talk about, which starts with Philippians 4:5. It says, let everyone see that you are considerate in all that you do. See, part of finding joy is being considerate in everything that you do. And hear me, because God is always faithful, we can be considerate in all that we do. This seems to be an extremely difficult one to get our heads and hearts wrapped around in 2023. There seems to be a lot less considerate nowadays and a lot more selfish behavior. And what's interesting is you can make a connection within the New Testament, because it's mentioned so many different times, that there's a spiritual connection between spiritual maturity and being considerate. So if you're considerate, that means you're maturing in your faith. If you're less considerate, it means that you probably got some work to do. We all have work to do. But it's just a good kind of litmus test. As a matter of fact, Paul in Titus chapter 3, verse 2 says, speak no evil about anyone, live in peace, and be gentle and polite to who? All people. Notice there's no asterisk there, okay? And that's important, all right? He's saying always remember everybody. Be considerate to everyone. See, sometimes when we're in the middle of conflict, being considerate is the furthest thing from our mind, right? We don't want to be considerate. We want to crush them. We want to win the argument or whatever it is. And we have to remember that we're followers of Jesus, and that is our greatest loyalty. Conflict happens. It happened in the Philippian church. Paul's addressing it. There's two leaders in the church, two women leaders that are having a disagreement. And Paul's like, look, don't let this ruin your life. And you're going to have conflict. And Paul's saying, look, be considerate. We're called to be considerate to others, even when we don't agree with them. You ready for this? Politically. Some of you, your heart stopped for a brief moment because you are so entrenched in your political beliefs. Well, hear me, there's nothing wrong with that. Just do not confuse it with your faith journey. I have strong political views. But I also understand that people view things very differently than I do, and I want to impact their life for the sake of Christ. It's going to be super important in the next couple of months. Social media has now become how we get to vent all of the things that we don't like about the world and how we view the world very differently, right? And we want to let the world know. And we got to be very careful, because if we're not considerate with people, we end up doing damage. And if we look behind us, there's carnage. We feel good, but then we end up hurting a bunch of people. A mentor of mine a long time ago gave me this piece of advice. He says, when you win an argument, you don't win anything. You've simply burned a bridge and you've given up a relationship. So be considerate in all that you do. We were on vacation this past week, as I said earlier, and one night we decided to go out to dinner. We didn't rent a car, so we decided to take a cab. And got in the car, got the kids and my wife in the car, and told the driver where we wanted to go to dinner. And he asked which one. I didn't know there were multiples. So we were trying to figure this thing out. And he was very difficult to understand, okay? He spoke English, but it was just difficult. And he spoke very quickly. And I was trying to get the address on my phone to show him what it was. And he was talking to me, and I wasn't completely understanding. Finally found the restaurant, and I showed him. And he turns around, and he looks at me, and he says, "I've already told you that." Okay. I said, "I must not have heard you. I'm sorry." And he goes, word for word, "Well, I told you 4 times. Can I just tell you, I'm going to have an honest pastor moment here. I wanted to reach across to the driver's seat, grab the seat belt, and wrap it around his neck. It's what I wanted to do. God's honest truth. And then the peace of God came over me, and we're going to talk about that here in a minute. That broken nature of me, and hear me, and all of us, I wanted to let this guy know what I thought. And I paused in that moment. I took a deep breath, and my 3 kids in the back, and thought, I could really mess some stuff up here. And just started dialoguing with him, asking him questions about his life, where he's from, did he live there his whole life, did he grow up? And we started having this conversation. My kids saw it. As soon as we got out of the cab, we got to the restaurant. I'll have you know, I paid the cab fare, and I even tipped the guy. Right? But at the end of the day, it's the right move. Why? Because I'm a representative of the King. And we get to choose whether or not we're considered or not. I could have chose the other option, but the only winner in that deal would have been my ego. Instead, we went on, we had a nice dinner, we got to our location, we had a blast, we got home, and all was well in the world. So make sure that you think about being considerate to others, which leads to the third element, and Philippians chapter 4, verse 6 gets us there. Don't worry about anything. Instead, pray about, what's the word? Everything. That's super important. Tell God what you need and thank him for all that he has done. Pray for everything, all right? Now, there's an asterisk there, right? No, there's not, okay? So it's not, hey, pray about everything except politics and presidential campaigns and protests and government issues and news media and wars and pains and pandemonium and killer raccoons. Those things you can worry about. Everything else, pray about, right? That's not what the scriptures tell us. The scriptures say pray about everything. Paul says don't be anxious about anything. And it's interesting. Why not be anxious? Because if we're not careful, anxiety, worry, and frustration, as we talked about earlier, threatens to choke our faith right out of us. And now we're appalling to the rest of the world. And see, it often leaves us, if we're not careful, suffocated by fear, and we grasp for hope, and we grasp for it in the wrong areas of life. We go looking for hope somewhere that's man-made, and it'll never be there. And Paul's not telling us that our fears are crazy or made up, right? We're imperfect people. They're not. They're not made up. They're real. However, we don't have a complete view of everything, and that's the thing that we need to be careful of. The thing that our fears are built on, we have an incomplete understanding. You ever been fearful and then everything work out all right? It's because you didn't have a full understanding of it. And see, we tend to want to handle the little things ourselves, right? Isn't it interesting? We want to handle the little things with ourselves so we don't bother God with it, and we only bother God when we really need the big things. But here's the danger in that. Is oftentimes if we don't get in a healthy rhythm, and this is a trained thing, it's something we've got to learn. If we're not learning to bring God the little things, then we won't bring God the big things. I said this a couple of weeks ago with generosity. You won't be generous when you have money if you're not generous when you don't have money. You just won't. People say that all the time. Oh, if I just make a little bit more money, I'll be generous. No, you won't, because you're not generous now. And if you want to bring the big things to God in prayer, you got to learn to bring the little things to God in prayer, because we're supposed to be praying about everything. And everything means everything, the big stuff and the small stuff. Now, there's a couple of things that you need to know, because oftentimes we like to put things in categories, big stuff, small stuff to God. The problem is, it's all small stuff as far as God's concerned, right? Doesn't matter. And if we don't let God help us through the day-to-day problems, how can we trust him to actually tackle the big stuff? It's a trust thing, and it takes time. Now, it's interesting because Paul takes it a step further, and he says, tell God what you need. Whether it's a little inconvenience or whether it's a major crisis, take it to him. Don't be afraid to ask God. Because we've been given a promise, okay? You've been given permission to ask God for the little things. Now, does that mean that God's going to answer every little prayer the way that you want it? No. It's getting in the habit of dialoguing with God about all of the things in life, being thankful for. 20 different times in the New Testament, 20 different times, it says, it commands us to ask God. Yet oftentimes we don't. In fact, in James chapter 4, verse 2, it says, you do not have because you do not ask God. So hear me, this is the third element. Because God is always faithful, we don't have to worry about what? Anything. We have no worries whatsoever. So remember, we've got to take the little stuff and the big stuff. You got to ask God for help in the small and in the big. Think about your biggest problems. Think about your biggest anxieties. Think about your biggest worry. Think about your biggest frustration that you're facing. Have you asked God for help? Now think about the silliest, dumbest things that you're facing right now or you're dealing with. Have you asked God for help? For the running noses and the late appointments and the broken water heaters and the office conflicts and the financial problems and the marital problems and the rebellious children. Oh, and cancer. Get what I'm saying? When the big stuff comes, when you're starting to dialogue with God on a regular basis, day in and day out, about the little things and the big things, then all of a sudden you learn and you develop this relational thing. I love when my kids come and ask, and I love telling them no a lot. Sometimes I surprise them and say yes. But relationships is built on what? It's built on trust. And you have to ask in order to get an answer, right? You'll never know the answer. And so you don't have because you don't ask, the scripture tells us. And Paul says, don't be anxious about anything. And then look at the result, okay? This is great. In verse 7 of Philippians 4. Then. So ask God for all the, bring all of the things to God and ask him. Then you will experience God's what? Peace. That's when you experience God's peace, which exceeds anything we can understand. His peace will guard your hearts and minds as you live in Christ Jesus. Don't you love that word peace? I love those peaceful, calm days where everything just seems to be going right. Paul says it exceeds anything that you'll understand. What's interesting is you cannot explain peace, but you know when you have it. Isn't it interesting? It's a feeling that you have. It's something you receive by faith. It's something that comes over you, but it's something you cannot explain. You can try to put words to it, but you can't really unpack the feeling that you have. Hear me, it doesn't necessarily say or mean, and Paul doesn't mean this, that God will always deliver you, that he will remove a painful person from your life, that he will beam you out of your problems. That's not what Paul's saying. What Paul is saying, and he's giving this promise. I told you, 3 elements of faith and a promise at the end. Here's the promise. God's always going to be with you. Good, bad, or indifferent, he's always going to be there. He wants to know our heart. He wants to know our concerns. He wants to know where we're anxious, where we're worried. Why? Because all of it's little to God. And he's walking with you, then what do you have to fear? And that's what Paul's trying to get the church at Philippi to understand, because Paul's in prison facing execution, but he realizes that there's something so much greater, right? He wraps up in verses 8 through 9. And now, dear brothers and sisters, one final thing. Fix your thoughts on what is true and what is honorable and what is right and what is pure and what is lovely and what is admirable. Think about these things that are excellent and worthy of praise. Keep putting into practice all that you learned and received from me, everything you heard from me and saw me doing. Then the God of peace will be with you. Please hear me. I realize it's not always easy to rejoice. I get it. There's a lot in life sometimes. Life throws curveballs. It isn't always easy to see the light at the end of the tunnel. Things come your way that you are not expecting and you don't know how to deal with it. But I want to give you this encouragement. Keep practicing. Keep practicing rejoicing. It's something that does not come naturally. And there will be relationship hurts and there will be heavy stuff. There will be things that come your way that you are not ready for. And Paul says keep practicing. Some of you right now are dealing with some heavy stuff. You are. Some of you are dealing with some life-altering things. And it's just hard to see the joy in it. Some of you got on social media this morning and you saw somebody's post and it made your blood boil. And hear me, I've had those same things. I ask sometimes, I'm like, why? What does that do? Nothing, right? Doesn't do a thing. Because the reality is this, we get a choice every single day. Every single day we get a choice to make, to choose joy or not. We were 10 days away with our family, as I said earlier, and then it came to a close. Got on an airplane, had to go through customs and all the things that we had to do, and we get to Orlando Airport. It's my last flight. We get home at 11:45. Every kid that has been to Disney World that week is on my aircraft. Don't have fond things to say about Mickey right now. And I realize that it's over, and I start thinking about all the stuff that I'm coming home to. Hundreds of emails in an inbox. School's getting ready to start. Fall kickoff of everything. It just seems overwhelming at times. And almost like God knew. I'm sitting in my seat, I'm looking out the window as we take off, and I start thinking about the sermon that I have to preach this Sunday, and I literally said, God, are you kidding me? And I just found myself sitting in the exit row, thanking him for the extra leg room. Thanking him for the trip that we were just on, thanking him for the time that I got away, thanking him that we've got a great team that handled everything here, that my kids are healthy, that we landed safely. We get out to the car, and my right tire has 15 pounds of pressure. It's 11:45 at night. I got out, I looked at the tire, got the tire gauge, and thought, all right, let's go. God, just get me home safe. Find a gas station with air, please. It's 11:45 at night, what in the world? We drive a little bit, asking God just to keep us safe. You're coming back from Pittsburgh Airport, there's nobody out there, right? I see a sign, Get-Go gas station, open 24 hours. My wife is scrambling in her car and in her purse looking for change. We found $1 worth of quarters. I get out and it's free air. Thanks, God. Fill it up. We get home. We get a good night's sleep, and here we are. You know, so many times we let the things of life ruin the beauty that God puts before us. And Satan just wants to nick and nab and poke and punch. And he just wants to rob the joy from our lives. And hear me, I know some of you are dealing with some stuff that's way more serious than 15 pounds of pressure in a tire. I get it. But I do believe this, that we can practice it each and every day. That we can grow in it, and it can become a reflex of ours. Instead of moving to the negative to start with, to move to the positive. Now, you're going to miss the mark some. We're fallen. We're going to have bad days where we mess up, where we say some things. I had to apologize on vacation to my daughter because I said something that was just... And you move on. And then you try to find the joy. And be reminded every day that you woke up this morning, you put food in your belly, you drank water out of a faucet. You got to come here and we got to worship God and we got to be reminded of how good he really is. Father God in heaven, we thank you. We have so much to rejoice over. Yet so many times we let relational conflicts and stupid stuff of our day get in the way of what you've really called us to be and do. So God, this morning I just want to ask, as I asked at the beginning, if there's somebody that we have not reconciled with, my prayer is that it will break our heart and that we will try to make things right, not for the other person, more importantly for us and our relationship with you, because Satan just wants it to fester. And God, also that we find joy and that we rejoice. Joy on repeat. I love that. That we're just reminded to find the good in all that we have and not to let the curveballs of life disgruntle us and get us down, because, God, they can so easily do that and get us off. So this morning, I pray that we're encouraged. I pray that we're uplifted and reminded of how good you are and that you are with us always, and we have no fear of life because of you. We love you and thank you. In Christ Jesus' name I pray, and we all said together, amen.